So Jung at the top of the field of psychology, clearly a super genius, working with Wolfgang Pauli, the top of the field of physics, Nobel Prize winner. So they're both to be taken seriously. And their goal was this marriage of physics and psychology, which they called the conjunctio. This is what they wanted. This was the most beautiful thing that could happen to both fields, Wolfgang Pauli said. It's this marriage of physics and psychology, which is what Plato's cosmology is, really. And they both recognize this is a restatement of Plato.
Welcome to Living 4D with Paul Chek. Today, Paul is talking with professor and author Tod Desmond. Tod is an adjunct professor of philosophy and religion at the College of Southern Maryland and the author of Psyche and Singularity, Jungian Psychology and Holographic String Theory. His work focuses on how physics and psychology mirror each other in a way that indicates the existence of God and the eternal soul. A big thank you to our premier sponsors, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley, and Organifi. We could not produce this podcast without their support. All the sponsors offer special discounts for our listeners, so please visit the show notes page at chekinstitute.com/podcast for links and details. Or just keep listening to this episode for the featured products and offers.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Living 4D with Paul Chek. Today, we're going to get into some deep and juicy stuff. The title of our podcast today is Psyche and Singularity. My guest is Tod Desmond, which he likes me to go by Tod. And his book, Psyche and Singularity, I found out by watching an interview with him and Jeffrey Mishlove on the new Thinking Aloud, which I highly recommend you watch that interview between him and Jeffrey, because it's badass. And his book, Psyche and Singularity, is really a beautiful marriage of Jungian psychology, a lot of the deep insights of Jung and Wolfgang Pauli, and black hole theory and Leonard Susskind's work, and a whole compendium of even Hindu metaphysics and teachings. It's quite a comprehensive weave that puts together a very coherent and beautiful picture about life and about you and about what the psyche is and many magical things that I think you'll really enjoy as you listen to us today. So, Tod, what a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. It's great to be here.
This is the book. It's got a beautiful mandala of the universe on the cover, Psyche and Singularity. And it's quite new, isn't it, Tod?
It actually came out in September 2018.
Oh, okay. Well, it's got the feel of a brand new book. Maybe it's because mine's brand new.
Right.
These concepts. I mean, even though Jung's been around, in our collective sphere for a long time. I mean, I think Jung died in 1961 and I was born in 1961. I don't think there's any more of a person that's had an impact on the field of psychology worldwide than Jung, from my perspective. I put him right up there with Rudolf Steiner for shocking insights.
Right.
And what you've done so beautifully is you've really taken a great cosmological perception or whole or cosmology and showed us how that works with the psyche. And it's really quite a comprehensive. It's very readable if you have a background in these sciences and you understand what you're talking about, but you do a very good job of explaining things. It's one of the best books I've ever seen for really marrying the human psyche with the cosmology that we are in and that is around us, which I don't think there's many books out there that do that too well.
Yeah, well, there was the Tao of Physics that was one of the first, plus the original writings by Pauli and Jung, but that is kind of on a more academic level. That's hard for the non-academic mind to kind of wade through all that technical jargon.
Yes, you've done a great job of it. And the thing is, too, Leonard Susskind, and you've got a lot of the current concepts of black holes and physics. And so I think for the modern mind that maybe has a background in studying Jung and also likes cosmology, it brings things together and it really creates a beautiful mandala. I'm an art therapist and an artist. You can see many of my mandalas on the wall back there. I'm very inherently tuned, and I've studied all of Jung's writings on art therapy and mandala. So for me, even the cover of the book and what you share inside really does create a beautiful mandala. But I would describe reading your book as a mandala experience. Having painted hundreds and hundreds of mandalas, as I'm reading your book, I almost get the feeling as though I'm being painted. It's like you're putting pieces inside of me and moving the pieces around so that the picture starts to get more and more clear, and it ties concepts together in ways that I don't think very many people have actually done the work, because you had to have done a hell of a lot of work to write that book. I mean, the amount of stuff you'd have to study and comprehend just to find all the correlations you've made. I mean, how many years did it take you to put that together?
It started in 2010 when I was at the PhD program at the California Institute of Integral Studies. They have a concentration in philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness. It's the PCC program. So I started studying Jung and Plato and quantum physics decades before that, but I discovered the holographic string theory in 2010. And when I was watching Through the Wormhole with Morgan Freeman, which was this new series back then, it was the
I've seen
second
it.
episode. Yeah, it was the second episode of the first season, and it was called the Riddle of Black Holes, and it was Leonard Susskind talking about the Black Hole War, Stephen Hawking. So that started the clock ticking, because then I recognized the parallel with Carl Jung's near-death experience. That was the first connection. So I bought Susskind's two books, The Black Hole War and The Cosmic Landscape, which the subtitle of that is String Theory and the Illusion of Intelligent Design. So he presents these works in an atheistic light. But then I kept reading through Jung's books, looking for parallels with Suskind's work, because that became the topic of my dissertation. By 2014, I had the dissertation done, which was the foundation for the book, which took another 4 years. So it was about, over 8.5 years from first learning about holographic string theory to coming up with that book. And it was pretty much constant work on it.
I'm curious. I don't know if I asked you this in an email. Are you familiar with Chris H. Hardy, the infinite spiral staircase theory?
No, not the name, but I've heard that theory.
Yeah, I'll forward you a couple of her papers. She's written probably 9 books. I've read them all. And she's got a deep scientific background, mathematical background, and she's also quite spiritually tapped in. But she's got some components in her book that I think are a nice supplement to. I think I love what you've got. I'm not at all complaining about it. I'm simply saying that what she does is she ties in segmentic or semantic fields, meaning fields, and she proposes that these meaning fields come from hyperdimensions that are nested in. And she also uses point origin, which in my series that I'm writing, I refer to the Nada Bindu point. And so she talks about the infinite spiral staircase as an infinite range of frequencies or harmonics or octaves in which the elements of creation emerge, within which are nested fields of meaning, which she then refers to things like Rupert Sheldrake's morphogenic fields and concepts like that, to show that meaning is inherent in the cosmos at every level. But as I was reading your book, I kept wondering, I wonder if Timothy has read any of her work. So I'll look through all the papers I have from her, and I'll send you one or two that I think gives you an overview. And then from there, you could look into more if it interests you. But I think she's got some pretty damn good stuff in there. I'd like to get the listeners to just know a little bit more about you and what shaped your worldview, your philosophy, and ultimately maybe what your philosophy, your spiritual philosophy, your living philosophy is. Like, how did Tod become Tod, and how did Tod develop the worldview that led to this amazing book?
Well, okay. I was born and raised in Bethesda, Maryland. My father's parents were both from Ireland. They were immigrants from Ireland, and so they had a strong Catholic tradition, especially my grandmother. And so my father was raised in that tradition, and he was a very devout Catholic. So he sent us, my brother and my sister, to the local Catholic school. And back then, there was still nuns and priests teaching at the Catholic schools. Today, it's rare. So from kindergarten on up through sixth grade, I was there, and just having that daily ritual and association with these nuns, especially, the celibate people who devote their lives to praying, it's got a powerful influence. And then I went to from middle school and high school to another Catholic school, a Catholic military school in Washington, D.C., called St. John's. So that just continued that tradition. Then for 2 years, I went to public school and then back to Catholic school at Boston College for my college. And it was while at Boston College studying philosophy. They make you take a year of philosophy and theology at a Jesuit school.
Hmm.
And they offered this one 6 credit course where you could get them both out of the way in the first year. And a lot of people take it, like, let me get this out of the way and then get down to business. And I enjoyed it. And I was used to that kind of thing from Catholic school, where you read in these religion textbooks and, it's this kind of same archetypal thinking. And then I had this finite math for business management. I was in the business school and I was doing horribly. And I just didn't get, just didn't get it. I was like, oh God. So I was excelling at the philosophy and the theology, and I was not excelling at the business math. And then I realized it's not even really a choice. It's a matter of do or die. I've got to switch. So,
Survival.
yeah, right. So I switched my major to philosophy and political science because the books we were reading a lot was overlapping. It was political philosophy, like Plato's Republic, for example. And so I continued with my college career, but then I really started falling in love with it, just loving reading these great philosophers. It was such a luxury. And by the time I got out of college, I was totally dedicated to spending my life trying to explain God philosophically and scientifically to the best of my ability. But I didn't go to graduate school right away because there's a prejudice in most academic circles against God, even at a Jesuit school where it's accepted, but no, it's kind of not embraced as fervently as you would expect. And I thought it's going to be a waste of my time to try to get an academic degree when I'm trying to do this kind of stuff. For 9 years, I lived the first 4 years on my parents' tree farm, raising these little seedlings into trees. And then when they were big enough, my dad's like, "Okay, when are you going to get a real job?" So I went, I
You
went
were
back to
growing with
Boston.
the trees?
I was growing my philosophy with the trees, and meanwhile, he's a successful businessman. So I went to Boston, back to Boston, because I know the place, and got a job as a night watchman at a group home for autistic boys. It's
Mm.
really age 14 to 22. So that was a severe situation for those young men. But it was great for me because it was the midnight shift. I'd come in there and put them to bed and study, read, sleep. You're allowed to sleep if, as long as you wake up if an issue occurs. And so I lived there for 4 years. And anyway, I just kept writing and studying. And eventually I went back to school. I went to Georgetown University for a master's in liberal studies because trying to get published my books, I got one letter back from one publishing company that said, "This is good stuff, but you're never going to get a book like this published without a PhD
Oh,
because it's academic work and you're not an academic." So then I had to make a decision. If this is really my calling, then I've got to do everything it takes to make the best of it. So I went back to school. I got a job as a campus cop because they pay for the school.
no good.
I had to work for a year before it kicked in, but I worked a midnight shift so I could keep writing and studying. So I worked a lot of years as a night watchman, midnight shift. That was how I got by. Then I got that degree. Then I went to the University of Hawaii to get a master's in political science, but it was the concentration's why I went there. It's alternative futures. So it was alternative political design was really what I was trying to get a degree in with this teacher, Dr. James Dater. And then I ended up at the California Institute of Integral Studies. And so my interests are Plato and the Vedanta philosophy, which are very, very, very similar. They're practically identical about the nature of the soul, reincarnation. This Plato talks about the tripartite mortal soul, and the Vedanta philosophy talks about the three modes of nature, sattva guna, rajaguna, tamaguna. And that combination of those three modes determines the caste system, which is not something that you're born into as far as inheriting it. It's something that you naturally manifest these qualities. It's been perverted in in India to whatever you're born into, that's what you're stuck as. Whereas it's supposed to be whatever your natural characteristics are, that's the role in society that you partake in. And if you're born to Brahmins, but you behave like a businessman, then you become a businessman. If you're born as a Shudra, a laborer, but you behave like a Brahmin, then you should become a Brahmin. And Nietzsche, another books I love Nietzsche because my theory about him is that he was pretending to be an atheist.
Well, when you talked about being in a Catholic school that wasn't too hot on God, the first thought that went through my head is God is dead. Nietzsche.
Yeah, right.
I was,
Yeah.
I was like, oh, Nietzsche.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the professors were hot for God. I mean, I had actual Jesuit priests, and so a lot of my teachers in the undergraduate level were genuinely faithful people. I was thinking more of the graduate programs, and like I said, at the Catholic schools then, 30 years ago, it was okay. They were genuine, but it was getting worse and worse, and it was just this creeping atheism that's just overrun academia for the most part. This school out in the California Institute of Integral Studies is kind of a unique situation because it's right there in San Francisco, which is kind of the leader of a liberal, which is leaned away from God, because religions are all the evils that have come from religions are focused on, but not the good things that come, but not at this school. It was an exception to the rule. So I went there, and that was great because there were some people there who believe in God, they believe in the soul, and they let me work out an academic degree. Then I discovered these correlations, and the people over there were very supportive, especially the chair of my dissertation committee, Sean Kelly, who was a great help. It was while taking his class in Carl Jung that I learned by reading Memories, Dreams, Reflections about Jung's near-death experience, which is when I read it, it was radical, but it didn't surprise me because so many radical things I was studying out there. But then when I saw the parallels with Leonard Susskind's holographic string theory, how perfectly they correlated, then it really started clicking.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. The path that your soul has taken you on is quite unique. Night watchman. My as I'm listening to you as a therapist, I'm thinking, I wonder if he's recovered from all the circadian stress of all those night
Oh
shifts.
yeah, no, my circadian rhythms are, I think, from the planet Neptune because my sleep schedule is just sporadic.
Yeah, I know the feeling. Penny and I traveled the world on airplanes, making it around the world twice a year, every year for probably almost 25 years. And by the
Wow.
time I hit 50, I went into a midlife crisis. But part of the problem was is I didn't know where home was anymore.
Yeah, right.
We when we bought our first house here in California, for the first year, there was no furniture because we wouldn't sooner unpack our bags and do our laundry. We're on the next airplane. So finally, after a
Right.
year, we just said, we got to get some furniture in this house. So I had, when I was hearing all those night watchman shifts, I'm thinking, oh my God, I know exactly what he must have felt like. I wonder if he's okay.
Yeah, it was. It was stressful on my health. And I took it all in stride. I mean, I could feel it was aging me, and I'm like, you know what? This is the price that's got to be paid. What other job can you study your own esoteric philosophy and get paid?
that's that's commitment. That's the hero's journey right there.
Right.
Todd, your book, Psyche and Singularity, draws heavily on Jung's life work and the concepts of depth psychology. Why is Jung and his work so important to you in the field of psychology and cosmology? I know that's a big question, but obviously, reading your book, you've got a very deep knowledge of Carl Jung and his teachings. Why do you think it's important for people that are interested in or are cosmologists potentially to look at Jung's work?
Well, the reason I always took him so seriously, I first picked him up in, I guess it was about 1993 when I was a senior at college. And just right off the bat, I was like, wow, this guy's really genuine and sincere and smart. His theory of the archetypes of the collective unconscious, I recognized right away how similar it was to Plato's theory of the absolute ideas imprinted on the soul. And I was already a big fan of Plato's. So it was kind of, the Alfred North Whitehead with the famous quote that the history of European philosophy is a series of footnotes to Plato.
Yes, I read that in your book, I think.
Yeah. So Jung is one of the best footnotes to Plato out there. That's one reason why I think his depth psychology is genuine, because it mirrors Plato's theory of the absolute ideas of the soul. And the reason he's important for cosmology is because he learned about relativity theory from Einstein himself in Switzerland from 1909 to 1913, while they were both teaching in Switzerland. And then later he learned about quantum physics from Wolfgang Pauli.
Yes, that's quite a teacher.
Right. So he's one of the three co-founders of the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics, the standard version in 1927 with Heisenberg and Bohr. So he worked with Pauli. Unlike Einstein, they had dinner conversations, but that was the extent of it. With Pauli, they became partners, intellectual partners. Yeah, and they set about developing a theory that the laws of psychology and physics mirror each other, because mind and matter both emerge from the archetypes, which they called the psychoid level. It's not material, it's not psychic, because it's the source of both. It's some transcendental level. And Plato said the same thing about the parallels between the laws of physics and the laws of the psyche, that the mathematical forms that describe the movements of the three-dimensional forms in the material world, those eternal mathematical forms, are like shadows of the higher level of these absolute ideas. So the laws of physics mirror these archetypes of the soul, and that was an idea that Jung and Pauli, I think, took to its close to its logical conclusion. And I think when Leonard Susskind came around and inadvertently provided the rest of the pieces of the puzzle, that brought us full circle back to Plato's original cosmology.
Yes, very interesting. Now, just for the audience that may not have a background in studies of cosmology, depth psychology, metaphysics, theology, I wanted to ask you if you could just lay the groundwork so that everybody knows exactly what you mean as we get into your book. I put the words down there on our outline that I thought, because everybody has their own idea of what God is. Most people really don't honestly know what the psyche is. Hardly anybody knows what spirit is. They use the words, but they don't know what they mean. The list of words that I have for you is God, psyche, spirit, soul, self with a little self, self with a capital SELF, and singularity, because it seems to me from reading your book that those are the key words that the whole story is built around. If I'm missing a word that you think belongs in there, then throw it on the table. But you want to encapsulate those words so that as we move forward, everybody knows exactly what you mean?
Yeah, sure. So the self with a capital S refers to what Carl Jung called the archetype of the self, which he also called the God archetype, the unus mundus, which is Latin for one world, and the one. And I equate that with what Plato called the idea of the good, which is the ultimate idea from which all of the other absolute ideas radiate and toward which they return. And so the self is just another word for God, the supreme self, and we are all subordinate selves with a small s, and we participate in that archetype of the self. And that psychological, so psyche is just the Greek word for basically soul, consciousness. And the way I use it is that it's a soul, it's your eternal self. So psyche is another word for self with a small s, which is a word for soul, and all souls participate in the supreme soul or the supreme self or God. Spirit people use differently. Like, for example, Hegel used it in one way and other people use it in another. But in the book, I'm probably quoting the word spirit, but I generally mean the same thing as soul, which is just another word for psyche. And I equate that with the gravitational singularity, which is a point of infinite density, and that the mirror of the laws of psychology are found in the laws of the gravitational singularity, and that the singularity is the soul. It's just another name for the eternal self. And a singularity is outside of space and time, and it's not a material thing, which gives a lot of physicists a headache. Even Wolfgang Pauli didn't like the idea of a singularity, but he rebuked the other physicists who wanted to just kind of create tricks to get rid of it from the theories, which is called renormalization.
Yeah, Feynman hated renormalization. I've read three of Feynman's biographies and watched tons of video footage of him because I'm interested in him. But he specifically spoke about how he hated all the tricks being used for renormalization.
Right. Yeah. So I remember one thing Pauli said about that is he goes, just because something's infinite doesn't mean it's nothing. Because renormalization is just getting rid of the infinities that the theories say are there. And the infinities is just another word for singularity, which is another word for psyche. And I think the physicists discovered the mathematical description of a soul. And they don't know what to do with it because that's where the laws of physics break down.
Hi, guys. What do you reach for when you want a little pickup, when you want a little happy making? There's lots of things that I used to love. For example, I used to love my espresso in the afternoon, but that caused me lots of problems, so I had to retool that one. There's a lot of things that have sugar in them, but my body hates that. If you want to be healthy and you want to be clean, there's not much you can do. But Organifi's got some new happy drops that, believe me, are really good. And they're simple. They've got passion flower, go-to cola, organic saffron, and ginger root extract. And these things are awesome. You put a couple in your mouth. I like to suck them and let them melt down slow. And in a few seconds, you are feeling happy again with a little mood elevation and a little energy lift too. I absolutely love these things. My kids love them. And the thing I love about them is they make me feel good without doing anything but good for me. So if you want to get some happy drops, go ahead and try these. You're going to be amazed. I absolutely love these things, and my kids love them too. And I know you're going to love them. And you don't have to feel guilty about it because there's nothing in there that's bad for you at all. Far better than an addictive anything, and great for you. Try Organifi's Happy Drops.
To try Organifi's new Happy Drops and to get 20% off your order, go to Organifi.com/Chek20 and use the promo code Chek20 at checkout. That's Organifi.com/Chek20, Organifi.com/CHEK20. And the promo code is CHEK20 for a 20% discount.
I think one of the problems, because, having spent my whole life studying this stuff, one of the problems that I see when you're confronting the very issues you've just described, and this is more of a Western problem, in my opinion, is that they keep equating a word like infinity or the symbol of infinity with nothing. And there's all this debate. I remember Deepak Chopra debated some scientific materialist scientist about God and the origins and how do you get something from nothing. But there's this the problem is that the Western mind keeps relating to nothing as though there's nothing there. Like, how do you create something out of nothing? But what I do for my students and what I've learned through my own inner exploration is the word nothing isn't really the right word. It should be no thing. In other words, the essence that we call soul or what we call consciousness is not a thing. And just because you cannot measure consciousness itself, to say that it's nothing and to dismiss it is a different than if you say it's no thing, because the implicate realm of David Bohm's hollow movement is not an objectively measurable thing either. But you wouldn't say that the wave dimension of quantum physics is nothing, and you wouldn't say that imaginary numbers are nothing. Something that's in the imaginal realm is something. It's called our dreams or our thoughts, but that's not nothing. So that's just my comment. I think that's the distinction people need to make is there's a difference between nothing and something that is no thing because it doesn't have a physical, tangible, weighable, measurable body. How do you objectively weigh or measure your love for your wife or your love for football or whatever? I mean, you don't say, well, we can't weigh it, so it's nothing. Well, yeah. Well, how come I love my wife then?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's the difference between an empirically observable thing and something that isn't in the empirical realm that you can perceive with your five sense organs. But even having said that, a gravitational singularity, which is nothing in the sense that it's a point of zero volume, it has no extension in three-dimensional space, but it does have visible gravitational effects. And that's how they know it's there. I saw one of the questions that you mentioned was, some people say that there are no black holes.
Right. That was
Now,
the electric universe.
yeah, and I wouldn't be able to comment on the mathematical reasonings people might have for why there's no gravitational singularity, but I know that there's been a tremendous number of empirical observations of the gravitational effects of black holes. Like in 2008, Reinhard Genzel was the head of a team of astronomers that were tracking the trajectory of stars in the middle of our own Milky Way galaxy. And the stars were whipping around in this tight orbit around some point that there's nothing there. But to have the effect like a sun would and the planets orbit around the sun, only the things that are orbiting around this point where there's nothing there are suns themselves, stars. It has to be, he says, beyond a reasonable doubt, it has to be a black hole. And there's these superheated jets of energy that shoot out of black holes that have been photographed.
Yes,
The
I've seen a
the
lot of these pictures.
Right. So I don't, maybe they say, oh, those are tremendously dense stellar objects of some kind, but they're not infinite. There's no singularity. Maybe they're saying that. But I don't know. There are black holes. That's empirically observable. What's in the center of them? Is it a point of infinite density that's outside of space and time, but contains all space and time? As the math suggests, maybe that's what they're projecting.
Well, I think you'll probably agree with what I'm about to say, but one of the things that I've observed in my life of study is that one of the most dangerous things there is a belief system, particularly. So when you get, an atheist belief system, or you get a electric universe, as much as I love the electric universe, they're going to be, they have very hard distinctions. There's no such thing as dark energy. There's no such thing as dark matter. There's no such thing as black holes. That's all bullshit. And they literally say that's bullshit.
Right.
And so right away, I see what starts off as a very good idea and still is a good idea. But when people have this principle of exclusion stronger than the open mindedness for the fact that it's ultimately a mystery, and like there's way more that we cannot figure out and way more that we do not know than we do know. So personally, in my own system of dealing with reality, if you will, is that I think it's important to always leave room for the unexpected, always leave room for the mystery, because there's too much that we cannot objectify. Like when you're talking about God, as soon as you start putting border, barrier, and definition, and God wants this and God demands that, you don't have God anymore. Now what you've got is the leader of a belief system. You've got the most powerful entity in any belief system. You don't really have God. If we had God, then we would all have the same way of relating to it. There wouldn't be all these different religions, or they might be different expressions, but they wouldn't be killing each other for having a different belief. So I think just my personal comment is that that's one of the things that is a human tendency, is to fall so in love with an idea that it fills your heart and blinds you.
Right. Sure. Yeah. Sometimes it takes that kind of total commitment to an idea to push it into the cultural sphere.
Yes.
And there's a price to be paid for being so focused on one theory.
Yes. Tod, what was Jung's relationship? Why was Jung's relationship with Wolfgang Pauli so important to the fields of psychology and potentially even quantum physics? I know you've touched on some things, but if you were to say, well, if there's quantum physicists out there that studied the books and the discourse between Jung and Pauli, how might that have impacted them? And if there's Jungian analysts and people that understand Jung or study Jung that read those discourses with Pauli, how might that have impacted them?
Well, there were two other quantum physicists who were right up at the top echelon, right there with Pauli, and that is Schrödinger and Heisenberg. They both read Carl Jung also, and they knew he was working with Pauli. And they also saw the relationship to Plato's theory of absolute ideas, and they respect that because he's the one who originated the academic search for the mathematical forms that describe the material world, which he saw as a stepping stone on the way to opening the eye of the soul to the idea of the good.
Mm.
This infinitely powerful source of light in the visible world and of truth and intelligence in the intelligible world, which St. Augustine in the Middle Ages then called God. So that Platonic idea of the good became the philosophical framework for Catholic theology, which became the framework for the Western mind. So when Pauli and Jung worked together, the reason that's so important is because Jung was the top of his field of psychology, only second to Freud in fame, and I'd say surpassing Freud in his understanding, because he
Yes,
went
for
from,
sure.
yeah, way surpassing Freud.
Yeah, it's anybody that I'm always baffled when people place Freud above Jung. I'm like, wow, you really haven't studied much of Jung's work.
Right. Freud was a groundbreaker, and he opened the field. But I think Jung, what's the image that's in my mind is that they've compared, I forget who it was, maybe it was Joseph Campbell, but he compared Freud to someone fishing while sitting on the back of a whale. He didn't know he was even on the back of the whale.
Yeah.
And then Carl Jung comes around and says, yes, personal unconscious is what you're talking about. But there's this collective unconscious, which is the cosmic sphere of Plato. So Jung at the top of the field of psychology, clearly a super genius, working with Wolfgang Pauli, the top of the field of physics, Nobel Prize winner. So they're both to be taken seriously. And their goal was this marriage of physics and psychology, which they called the conjunctio. This is what they wanted. This was the most beautiful thing that could happen to both fields, Wolfgang Pauli said. It's this marriage of physics and psychology, which is what Plato's cosmology is, really. And they both recognize this is a restatement of Plato.
Conjunctio is a alchemy term for union of the opposites for people that don't know that.
Right. Yeah. And that archetype, the God archetype, they define as the ultimate archetype of wholeness through the union of opposites. That's the source of everything, because everything comes in pairs of opposites. It's these polarities that create the tension, which creates the energy of existence itself. And all of those opposites are originating in this ultimate self archetype, the unus mundus, God, and the one.
Which in many ways has a lot to do with the foundation or the theme of individuation, is the integration of the ego with the unconscious, which is really to say the nexus of other people's ideas with the soul.
Yeah, absolutely. The union of opposites is the essence of individuation. So Carl Jung said that the goal of life is individuation, which is uniting the opposites, especially your conscious ego with the collective unconscious. But it's also uniting the opposites of your animal life as an embodied psyche and your social role in society. He said that usually it's in the second half of life where you get serious about individuation, because the first half you're just building yourself up to try to establish yourself as a human being and your social role in your career. And he says once you've met at least the minimum demands, and I like that because the bar is low enough where I'm like, okay, I think I've met the minimum, then you withdraw your identity, your sense of self, from those two opposite realms of your animal bodily existence and your social role. You say, I'm not either one of those. I'm a unique being. And then you identify with the ultimate archetype of wholeness through the union of opposites, the self, of whom you are a part and parcel. And then you can re-embrace those two opposites of the human self, the bodily instinctual self and the social self, in the understanding that everything comes from the supreme self.
Yeah, I get the image of the centaur. The first half of your life, you're so excited you can run and jump everywhere, but then you get to the middle and you go, why do I keep shitting everywhere? And what's this horse I got for a lower body?
Yeah, right.
and how do I get up here so that the whole thing moves upstairs a little bit and I get past my my instinctual drives and my unconscious behaviors?
Right. Oh, yeah. It's not easy. That's why he said it's usually going to be in the second half after you kind of sowed your wild oats.
It might be in the second half of a few hundred reincarnations as well.
Right. Yeah.
I don't think that comes quick.
No, I think it's the rarest thing in the world.
Yeah. I remember I've studied Osho quite a bit just because I found him very interesting and entertaining for many years. But he says it takes 6 billion people to produce one truly enlightened human being. So if you think that, the completion of the individuation process is enlightenment, then it takes quite a while to get one to pop up in the garden.
Yeah, right. And then it's a continuous, that's another thing Jung stressed. It's not like, oh, you achieve individuation and that's it. It's you have to maintain this level of harmony of the opposites, and it's almost impossible. But at least it's a goal to strive for.
It's also like Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. I remind my patients and my students that there's not one hero's journey. As soon as you finish one, trust me, the next one will find you. The question
Right.
is, are you going to take what you learned from the first one so the second one's a little less bumpy? It's a growth spiral.
Sure. Yeah, you mentioned the hero's journey. I've also got a class now that I put out on YouTube, which is based on the book, and it's called Immortality and the Unreality of Death: A Hero's Journey Through Philosophy, Psychology, and Physics.
Oh, that's good. I might have to get into that. I mean, I hardly have time to wipe my backside, but
Right.
looking at
Yes.
looking at your course that goes with the book that you showed me and gave me the access to, I'm like, oh my God, this is so dangerous. This is a black hole. I could stay here for hours.
Right. Yeah. So it's open to the public now on YouTube. We're just putting it out there, and we do have for sale a multiple choice test you can take to get a little certificate of a Psyche and Singularity scholar. Is just kind of a way to make some revenue for those who are interested to reinforce the ideas by taking a test. But you can take the whole course for free. The,
The
the
Psyche and
Psyche,
Singularity, or the other one you talked about, the Hero's Journey one.
the Hero's Journey one, it's based on the book Psyche and Singularity.
Is that the
But
one you showed me?
yeah,
Oh,
yep.
okay. Well, that's
And
really nice.
since
That's very
then,
well done.
yeah, thanks. It was my friend Beto Paredes and the Platonic Mystery School of the Divine Infinite Being. They helped me create that with all the the technical work.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and look. And I'm rushing to try to get I've got a 15 volume book series I'm releasing, and a whole online mentorship training program. And it's very, very comprehensive. I've been working at it for many years myself. So I'm kind of like just going through the labor pains, the head's coming out of the birth canal. So when I get my hands on something like that course that you offered and gave me the pass to, it's like one of those terrible feelings where it's kind of like a drunk, It's like if I open that bottle,
Right.
you know, I got to make
Sure.
sure I just get past the finish line before I open that bottle. But I'm one of the guys that'll be opening the bottle. You can rest assured.
Yeah. Yeah. So but the hero's journey is definitely Campbell's. He's the one who's famous for using that phrase. But this individuation is the hero's journey, as
Yes,
you
it
were
is. Yeah,
saying.
yeah, it really is. I like the way the hero's journey is structured. If you really teach Jungian individuation, it's hard to teach to somebody the theory of it without a background in Jungian psychology, but I can take the steps of the hero's journey, the departure, the ordeal, the return. There's different models from 12 steps or more. And I've done podcasts on the hero's journey and gone through the whole cycle, but I think almost anybody can understand the hero's journey without having to go into explaining, the depth of what you have to understand, like what is the unconscious and, what is the ego really, instead of people's thinking about it. So I just love Joseph Campbell's work because I think it fits the standard Western mind, and the most people out there can follow it and look at their life and go, wow, there it is. It's an easier thing. Now, of course, I love the Jungian concept of individuation, and I think I read a whole book by Murray Stein called Individuation, which I think did a great job of really encapsulating it. But they are really the same process, as you said. To get into your book, it's a pretty comprehensive work. I've been trying to spend time every morning reading it, and I've asked my soul to guide me to where to go in the book to pick up, to get really to the essence of what it is that you're trying to convey. But I had a head start by listening to your interview with Jeffrey Mishlove, because you did a very good job of outlining it, and he did a good job of asking you the right questions. So that helped a lot. It is somewhat of a theory of everything, in my opinion. And you do combine Jungian psychology and string theory to create a beautiful, comprehensive picture of the human psyche, the self at the individual level, and the self at the big level. Could you overview what it is that you feel you could share to encapsulate for the listener really the story that you're unfolding in your book?
So the two main points, I think it's important to understand where I'm going with the book, is the central singularity and the encompassing horizon of the cosmos. I mentioned Carl Jung's near-death experience before, and so I'll mention that first, and then I'll mention his what I call the Leap Day letter of 1952, where he wrote a letter to J.R. Smithies trying to equate psychic energy with mass with the E equals mc squared equation. And his final formula was Psyche equals highest intensity in the smallest space. And he wrote it in the context of general relativity. And he learned about relativity theory from Einstein himself. And that according to general relativity, the highest intensity is infinite density of matter, and the smallest space is zero volume. And he mentioned both of those concepts in that letter. And that's the definition of a gravitational singularity. So that's where this equation, Psyche equals singularity, comes from. It's a point of infinite density with zero extension in space, and it contains all of space and time. And all of space and time comes out of it at the Big Bang. Here's another important piece of this puzzle, and this I got from a philosophy professor named Robert Bruce Ware, who wrote a book about Hegel, and he was equating Hegel's concept of the absolute idea with the gravitational singularity. And he brought in Leibniz's principle of the identity of indiscernibles, according to which if you cannot tell the difference between two things, they are identical. And Ware was saying you can't tell the difference between the structure of two singularities because they're mathematical points. They have no structure. And you can't differentiate them by their different locations in space and time because they're outside of space and time, because according to relativity theory, a point of infinite gravity is equivalent to a point traveling infinitely fast. And if you travel at even the much slower speed of light, you exit space and time because of what Einstein called length contraction and time dilation. That's relativity theory. If you took a clock and you accelerate it close to the speed of light, then the hands slow down and they stop at the speed of light. And the object would also contract in the direction of travel until it would compact into nothing at the speed of light. So singularity is outside of space and time. Therefore, all of the singularities which exist, the original singularity of the Big Bang, the singularities inside black holes strewn throughout the galaxies, the singularity of the supermassive that are inside supermassive black holes in the center of galaxies, and very importantly, and you mentioned David Bohm and the implicate order, quantum physics indicates there's a singularity at every single point of the quantum vacuum underlying three-dimensional space. So they're omnipresent, strewn throughout space-time, but they're all outside space-time. So they're in some inconceivable way, they're many and yet simultaneously one. And just while I'm on this topic, we mentioned earlier, what's the difference between self with a capital S and self with a small s? And the way I differentiate the archetype of the self is that's the singularity who sees through the perspective of every other singularity simultaneously. Whereas you and I are singularities, but we only perceive through our own subjective point of view. And the supreme singularity sees through everyone's subjective point of view simultaneously and achieves thereby the union of subjectivity and objectivity by taking the subjective point of view to the infinite extreme.
Which is really like saying God, isn't it?
It's exactly like saying God. Self is just another word for God. The self with a capital S. And we're all little parts and parcels of God. We have all of the qualities of God, but just not the quantity.
We're like fractals.
Yeah, exactly.
Hi, I wanted to jump in here and let you know that this year marks the 20th anniversary of the now iconic book that started it all, How to Eat, Move and Be Healthy by Paul Chek. This special milestone marks 2 decades of the book guiding individuals on their journey to holistic health. And in that time, we have brought out 2 editions as well as versions in Swedish and Dutch. If you already have a copy, you will know that it is full of Paul's timeless and tested advice, and it has helped thousands of readers as Paul gets letters and emails from people all over the world. But did you know that the idea for the book came to him because he would have to repeat the same instructions over and over each time he took on a new client? So he decided to put his key coaching points into a book so he could help more than one person at a time. Fun fact, the book was initially going to be called Flatten Your Abs Forever, and the first draft was so long that the standing joke in our office was that all you had to do was lie on the floor with the book on your stomach and you would have instant flat abs. In honor of the 20th anniversary, I am thrilled to announce that we are releasing 2 exclusive versions of this book. The standard commemorative edition is perfect for first-time readers looking to discover the book for the first time, or those loyal followers who want to revisit it again. And for those who seek something truly unique, we present the Special Collector's Edition, an exclusive limited number with each book personally signed by Paul himself. Hurry, as both commemorative editions will be a limited print run. So to get your copy of the 20th anniversary edition of How to Eat, Move and Be Healthy, go to chek.group/eatmove20. That's chek.group/eatmove20.
One of the things in your book that I absolutely loved was right at the beginning. The quantum wave symbols equal the symbol of the self.
Yeah.
That, because there you go, you've got the implicate dimension, and then you've got the beginning of material formation, or you've got Shakti, wave dimension, and Shiva, the point and the symbol of the self, the emerging from the womb. And I thought that was, honestly, that is probably the best combination of symbols I've ever seen, because it really tells you, there's the Western conception, the invisible, the infinite, the no thing, and there's the production of something from nothing. And so you tied these two things together, and I'm like, wow, I wish I could have figured that one out, because that was fucking profoundly good.
Yeah, I'm as surprised as everybody else who appreciates this field of what kind of popped in, what it just kind of fell in my lap. So from the singularity, now I'm going to go to the horizon of the cosmos, which is defined as that point where, from our perspective, wherever you go, this is another important point, according to general relativity, wherever you go in the universe, you will perceive yourself as the central point away from which the rest of the universe is accelerating away in every direction at an accelerating rate. And when that expansion of space-time reaches the speed of light, that outer boundary, that spherical boundary from your perspective, that's called the horizon of the cosmos. It's where space-time is expanding away at the speed of light. You can't get back in after you go past that, just like you can't get back out of a black hole after you pass the event horizon, which is where the flow of space-time reaches the speed of light as it contracts towards the central singularity. So the universe is an inside-out black hole, according to Leonard Susskind, who I learned string theory from. It's expanding from a singularity instead of contracting into one.
Right. Yeah, I see what you mean. So it's like, I'm trying to think of a way, because most people would have a hard time with the concept of an inside-out black hole, but it would be like, normally the inside of a basketball is black, and we perceive that the inside's the inside, but if you turn the basketball completely inside out and life was on the surface of it, and the inside was the invisible point, would that be a good way to analogize it?
Well, I think the way he was saying it's an inside-out black hole is just the directionality of space-time.
So instead of moving in, it's moving out.
Exactly. Oh, instead of collapsing into the singularity, it's exploding from the singularity. And the event horizon, they're both very similar in his philosophy, but the event horizon of a black hole is where space-time is contracting toward the singularity in the center at the speed of light. Whereas the cosmic horizon, which is an inside-out event horizon, is where space-time is expanding away from the central point at the speed of light. And this is where the holographic string theory really starts to make the difference here. And this, just so that the people listening will know where we're going, Carl Jung had a near-death experience where his psyche experienced this horizon of the cosmos. And what he described in his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, is the same thing Leonard Susskind, the atheist, described with his mathematical theory of information conservation. So it began when Stephen Hawking said anything that goes into a black hole is erased from the universe. And then Leonard Susskind, when he heard that, he realized that made sense, but he also realized that that violates the most fundamental principle of physics, which I didn't even know about until I was watching Through the Wormhole with Morgan Freeman, and he explained it. It's called the principle of information conservation. So there's the principle of conservation of energy and mass, but even more fundamental than that, he says, is this conservation of information. So the example is if you explode a hand grenade, not only is all the energy and mass that was originally condensed in that grenade still somewhere in the universe, but you should at least theoretically be able to trace each fragment of gas and metal back towards the original object. That information is also conserved in the universe. It's scrambled, but it's there.
You would have
What's
to be able to make meaning.
Yeah, if you would lose, well, yeah, this is this fundamental point. But Stephen Hawking says, but if it goes past the event horizon of a black hole, you can't trace anything that's gone past that event horizon. So that information is locked up in the black hole. It's conserved in that respect, but you can't access it. And then he said black holes eventually radiate away Hawking radiation, which deals with the quantum vacuum and virtual particle-antiparticle pairs, which we can talk about because it's an important part of this theory. But eventually a black hole will evaporate from our perspective in this temporal world, and then that information's gone. So Leonard Susskind realized if that's true, then you've just created a sinkhole in the whole field of physics, and all of the laws of physics are going to go down that hole. And there'll be no firm foundation for any of our laws of physics. So that information must be conserved, and he became obsessed with showing how that must be the case and convincing Stephen Hawking furthermore.
I remember when Stephen Hawking basically stated that he changed his position and that information was conserved.
Yeah, I believe that was 2004 when he
I
admitted.
remember him announcing that.
Yeah, he admitted defeat in the Black Hole War, and it was Leonard Susskind who defeated him with Gerard 't Hooft, another Nobel Prize-winning physicist. They were partners, Susskind and 't Hooft. So what Susskind says is, from one perspective, if you follow information past, information is just the way to describe an object, and he ultimately will define it as twists and turns of a fundamental string. So this is string theory, which we need to briefly describe. But to get to this principle of information conservation, he said if you follow something past the event horizon of a black hole, then it's, from your perspective, erased from the universe. It cannot get out past that event horizon. But if you were watching from outside the black hole, you would see something different. You would see that object smeared out around the event horizon, and then it would leak back out with the outgoing Hawking radiation. So Hawking radiation is at the quantum vacuum. There's these virtual particle-antiparticle pairs constantly erupting and then combining and annihilating each other so quickly that it somehow conserves this conservation of energy. But it's creating energy, and that's what they say is causing the expansion of space-time, these virtual particle-antiparticle pair collisions. But if a particle-antiparticle pair emerge right on the razor's edge of an event horizon, the antiparticle gets sucked into the black hole, and the particle, the virtual particle, gets released as a real particle, and it carries with it some of the information that is conserved on the event horizon. And that is how information is conserved. And now he said the universe itself is an inside-out black hole, and so he called that black hole complementarity. If you follow something past the event horizon, it's gone. But there's a complementary perspective, whereas if you're outside the black hole watching, you'll see it smeared out on the event horizon and then released with the Hawking radiation. And that conservation of information on the event horizon is called the holographic principle, because it's like a holographic film. And it's easier to understand the holographic principle when he says the universe is an inside-out black hole. And if you were to follow an object past the horizon of the cosmos, where space-time is expanding at the speed of light, you couldn't get back in. That information is lost from the universe. But if you're watching from within the universe, you'd see it smeared out around this huge sphere, a two-dimensional, perfectly flat sphere, the surface of a three-dimensional ball. And then it would radiate back in to the volume of the universe with the cosmic microwave background radiation, which is the echo of the Big Bang. Arno Penzias was this two guys in New Jersey.
Bell Laboratories.
Yeah, and they discovered this, and they got the Nobel Prize for it. So the echo of the Big Bang, cosmic microwave background radiation. It comes in the form of these elastic strings. So string theory says that quantum particles are actually made of even smaller strings, so small you can't observe them with current technology down at the Planck scale, 10 to the negative 33 centimeters, and that these little tiny strings are elastic, and that from some perspectives, it seems as if they stretch all the way from the horizon of the cosmos into the interior volume of the universe, and they create this holographic movie. He called our three-dimensional world a cinematic hologram, that the past, the present, and the future are conserved at each point of this outermost sphere. And then they radiate in on these fundamental strings of energy to create the cinematic hologram.
I understand the whole issue of information conservation, but this topic, the way this is being handled by physicists, etc., is though information is somehow equivalent to matter, because information doesn't need a body. It's not a physical thing. Because the way they're relating to information being lost in a black hole, it's different if your body goes into a black hole or a rock goes into a black hole. But information is not corporeal. The words we read on a page are symbols that point to something that has meaning, but that is not a physical thing. So can you share your thoughts on why they're using concepts that deal with physical things to try to address information which is not a physical thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. The way he defines a bit of information, which is the fundamental unit of the material world, he calls a bit of information.
Like Wheeler, it from bit.
Yeah. He says it's a yes, no answer to a question about the most fundamental ingredient, which he says are these little strings. So it'll tell you about the twists and turns of a fundamental string. So string theory says that the quantum particles are made of these little vibrating strings, and they wrap around the 6 extra dimensions of space that are compactified at each point of three-dimensional space in these geometrical shapes called Calabi-Yau manifolds. And the way they wrap around those Calabi-Yau manifolds determines which quantum particles we detect, a photon or a proton or an electron or a quark. All the quantum zoo of particles can be reduced to just one string, and the way those strings wrap around those compactified dimensions, the geometry of those dimensions determines which particle you'll see. The frequency of the string and the geometry of the compactified dimensions, so that Michio Kaku, for example, said it's like the universe is a symphony of strings, and all of the quantum particles are like notes on a string. So why would he call a bit of information, which is a conscious word? Information is something that a conscious entity trucks with. It's not a material thing. It's a good question.
Well, energy information is what produces information. I mean, the fact that the energy of your body is in the formation that we recognize as Tod means that we've tied the concept of Tod to the body of Tod. But the actual Todness is not something physical. So you can't compact it. You can't stretch it. And
Right.
at the end of the day, it's pure energy. And even the black hole itself is energy.
Yeah. Black holes are tremendously energetic, infinitely energetic in the central point.
I'm only asking you this because you're one of the few people I know that I could ask this question, because this is how my mind works. I'm like, wait a minute, they're dealing with information as though it's physical stuff, which unfortunately has the skunk smell of a materialistic bent. And I think that's one of the problems, because if you don't have a deep enough spiritual life to realize, okay, how do you weigh and measure a thought? Steiner says thoughts are actually the flow of spirit. I define spirit as a flow of energy and information. So my reason for bringing this up is because it creates an impasse for me, because having studied Bohm's work a lot and the implicate order, you couldn't compress the implicate order in a black hole. all you could do is say that everything that's explicit is becoming implicate as it enters the black hole to become annihilated or move into the point of a singularity. But anyhow, I'm not trying to do anything except share a concern that
Oh,
rises in
no,
me.
it's a good question. Susskind takes the posture of an atheist, but he's aware that his theories are pushing up on the realm of the kind of the spiritual, really. And
Yeah,
I think that's why he kind of goes overboard to present it atheistically, because he doesn't want people dismissing it as some attempt at mysticism.
I could help him a lot. All it would take is one hit of DMT and he would move out of atheism because he would meet the world of energy and information that's non-physical.
Well, he mentioned taking LSD when he was in Berkeley
That's
in
a
the
start.
60s. Yeah.
That's a start.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. Psychedelics can help kind of jumpstart some of these people and give them a little bit of open a little black hole into the mind of God for a minute.
When I have questions like this, I either go into deep meditation and ask my soul to guide me, or I do a ceremony and I do a mandala. I symbolize everything I'm asking. I point my mind exactly in that direction so that medicine does not push me around. And man, I have got 150 notebooks full of crazy insights that I've gotten that have become integral to my whole living philosophy. Give me pay dirt. Like, how do you explain when a spirit is answering questions that nobody else can answer? And then you go, like, I'm doing healing ceremonies with people and talking to angels that show up
Right.
who tell me, use that tuning fork and then do this and press this acupressure point and this acupressure point. And I'm following, I don't know I'm just taking orders. And people that have had traumas that have been around for 30 years are gone and their whole life changes. And they write me letters years later saying, you changed my whole life. And I'm telling you right now that this is the kind of stuff that an atheist cannot wrap their head around, but you cannot argue with tangible results. And I've done this over and over and over again to the point I have no question about God. I have no question about the spiritual realm because it's more real to me than the physical realm because it's there when this is gone.
Yeah,
Right.
this is a movie projection from that eternal realm.
Yes. Now, before you move on, you've spoken many times about the point and the singularity as a point. I haven't found out in your book yet if you referred to Shiva Tantrism. Have you referred to?
Yep, I
Okay.
do. The Shiva Bindu, the central point in the mandala. Yeah, I was quoting Carl Jung, who mentioned it in particular.
Okay, good. I just haven't quite picked up your discussion of the Shiva Tantra traditions because I've studied their cosmology and it's very beautiful and it's a very central part of my own spirit gym structure. And while I was reading your book this morning, I had a vision. And here's what I saw. And I want to see what you think about this. I saw a Nada Bindu point spinning at the speed of now. And emerging from either end of it was exactly what Itzhak Bentov showed emerges from a black hole. You got a white hole at one end, and you got the yin, the drawing in aspect, and you've got the expressive aspect. And my soul said, that is the string.
Huh.
And Chris Hardy's theory shows that goes infinite octaves up and down.
Right. I mean, just it seems plausible from what you're saying. Yeah, I wouldn't know. I couldn't make a definitive proclamation about it, but you're saying it's drawing the energy so tightly that it becomes
It's like
like a Planck
spinning.
scale.
It's spinning spirit at such a high rate of intensity that it takes no thing and becomes something. What is a photon? Something with no mass, but it's the basis of matter.
Yeah, right. That's another huge mystery of the universe. A photon has no mass.
Right. And so what my soul showed me is that the Bindu point, for which there's an infinite number everywhere in space, Cantor said you can, a line of any length has an infinite number of points. So that means if you even put a dot on the page, there's an infinite number of points in there. So you're talking about something that goes way below the Planck scale. I mean, the Planck scale, I think it's 10 to the minus 34.
Right.
And
I've
so,
heard 33, but like what?
yeah,
What's
I've got books that show different things. But if
Yeah,
you
I do
look it up
too.
on the internet, I think it says 10 to the minus 34. But either way, you and I know it's 10 to the minus 30 plus.
Yeah,
But a
very
Bindu,
small.
not a Bindu point would be so far below that, you couldn't even come up with a way to measure it, okay?
Yeah, zero volume.
So what my soul showed me is that a Bindu point is a mini black hole with a white hole, and the symbol that I was given when I was doing all my research for Spirit Gem is the Tai Chi symbol. My soul said the Bindu point is the Tai Chi symbol shrunk down to a point, and it is the implicate order on the yin side of the symbol, and it's the explicate order on the yang side of the symbol. And God dreaming itself into existence is the Om that makes the Nada Bindu point spin and vibrate to produce information that organizes energy into material form.
Yeah, I mean, I see where you're going with it. It seems cohesive.
Well, my reason for sharing with you is nothing other than to say, what do you think about it? And I've seeded it in your mind. So please meditate on it, digest it, see what happens, and share with me, because this is why I say when these guys talk about information and stuff, like you're missing the spiritual world. And I spent
Yeah,
my
they
whole
are.
life going there because I can't get answers out of books half the time. So I either have to go talk to Carl Jung in the afterlife, which I do regularly, and Steiner, and ask them questions. But I just go into meditation and empty myself and hold the question, which is classically called contemplative meditation, as you know. And I just wait for the answer. And this morning I'm reading your book, and all of a sudden, this image appeared in my mind, and I literally saw the Nada Bindu point, and I saw these jets streaming out exactly like Itzhak Bentov drew the pictures of how a black hole, white hole pair works. And then I said, what am I looking at? And my soul told me that. And I thought, I got to share that with Tod, because I wonder if he's ever thought of that, because it really helps bridge the gap between the implicate and the explicate order, and it fits right along the line of your whole book.
Well, the idea of a spinning singularity, Roy Kerr in 1963, he came up with another exact solution for Einstein's gravitational field equations, and it indicated that black holes would be spinning. And a spinning black hole, the singularity would form, instead of a point, it would form a two-dimensional ring.
Mm-hmm.
And there'd be a wormhole opened up by that spinning black hole. But most physicists stick to calling the singularity just a point because the mathematics is a lot simpler. But if you wanted to develop that idea further, you would definitely want to look into Roy Kerr.
Hi, everybody. I sure hope you're enjoying the podcast. As a therapist that is constantly teaching people about nutrition and hydration, I've found that the only people that really understand and use electrolytes, in general, are endurance athletes. But what most people don't know about is the importance of electrolytes for general health, mineral nutrition, improved hydration, blood sugar and insulin regulation, enhanced vitality, and enhanced brain function. Though there is a rising awareness of electrolytes and many companies offering them, I can assure you that they are not all created equally, and what that usually comes down to is the quality and the cleanliness of the source materials and how they are combined. Having tested many electrolyte products, I was honestly shocked when I experienced Paleo Valley's essential electrolytes. Why? Because I eat a super high quality diet and back it up with the world's highest quality whole food supplements to guarantee a full spectrum of nutrition, and I'm a lover of high quality salts, so I thought for sure I was getting enough electrolytes. When I tested other electrolyte products, I honestly felt no difference. When Paleo Valley sent me their essential electrolytes to test, I was honestly shocked at how much more energy I had. I even experienced an improved level of mental clarity that I didn't expect from an electrolyte drink of all things. Paleo Valley's essential electrolytes are available in orange, watermelon, and lemon lime flavors and is a whole food sourced electrolyte blend. Get the complete benefits of trace minerals and electrolytes found in unprocessed ancient sea salt, organic coconut water, and seaweed extract without the refined sugar and synthetic ingredients in most electrolyte drinks. Though Paleo Valley's essential electrolytes are good for children and adults, I feel this product may be one of the most important dietary additions for anyone age 50 and beyond, because the benefits that essential electrolytes offers addresses many of the problems common in aging people today. In fact, I've been adding them to my daily health and performance shake since the day I first tried them and will continue to do so. To get your essential electrolytes and save 15% on your order, go to paleovalley.com/Chek15. That's PALEO valley.com/CHEK15. If we want to make the world a better place, we've all got to stay healthy and fit and support companies like Paleo Valley because they're a perfect example of the kinds of companies we need more of in the world today. Enjoy essential electrolytes.
My soul told me that the Nada Bindu point is where the infinite meets the infinite. In other words, the Nada Bindu point is where the infinite becomes infinite. And the reason I have looked into this is because one of the questions I had for many years is, how does God as unconditional love create everything? Because by definition, if God is unconditional, then how do you get all these conditions? And my soul said, God creates conditions so that it can love itself unconditionally. And that answered the mystery. But what I was told through my own spiritual investigations is that the Nada Bindu point is the point at which the infinite becomes infinite.
Sure, that would work with the Psyche equals singularity equation also. We're each a point of infinite density, and yet we are in the finite world, and we're simultaneously existing at each point of this horizon of the cosmos. This is it was this idea of information conservation at the horizon of the cosmos that mirrored Carl Jung's near-death experience. And it shows really that the horizon of the cosmos is equivalent to what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious mind.
Yeah, sorry for the interjection, so please feel free to continue. I didn't want to stop your flow, but I knew if I waited till later, because it was so contextually right
yeah, it all fit together.
This is what you do to me, my friend.
So yeah, well, the horizon of the cosmos, says Leonard Susskind, the atheist, that every bit of information from the past, present, and future of the entire volume of the universe is located at each point of this encompassing sphere, which he says, from our perspective on Earth, is infinitely hot. It's therefore infinitely energetic, which means each point is a singularity, because a point of infinite energy in a literal point, that's a singularity. And then it radiates back in on these strings with a cosmic microwave background radiation to make this holographic movie that we live in. So Carl Jung, when I heard him explain that on the series Through the Wormhole with Morgan Freeman, it brought to my mind Carl Jung's description of his own near-death experience, which happened in 1944, which he wrote about in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, which was published the year after he died. So it was published in 1962. It's important because we know he wasn't getting the idea from reading Leonard Suskind's theory. And we know Leonard Susskind wasn't getting his idea from Carl Jung. At least we can be fairly confident, because he's presenting the theory as the antidote to everything Carl Jung stood for.
Because he's an atheist, and Jung was. It's kind of funny because Carl Jung said, speaking of atheists, he said, for something to be rejected, it must first be real.
Right? Yeah, he was the antidote to atheism, in my opinion.
Yeah,
and Leonard Susskind, I believe, is helping him more than any theist ever has.
That's God's sense of humor, though,
That's
isn't it?
That's exactly what I see it as. I use my phrase. I read a lot of Nietzsche, and I like his maxims, his short, wise sayings. That which does not kill me only makes me stronger.
Yeah.
I got a comical take on that one. That which does not kill me only makes me wish it did.
That's a very appropriate for lots of people in the last 4 years.
Right. But one that I came up with is that irony is the fingerprint of God.
Yes, there you go.
And I've never seen anything so ironic as Leonard Susskind presenting his string theory as the antidote to belief in God. Because I think it's the final evidence that we can really start to blend everything together and show a real picture of how psyche and cosmos combine. So Carl Jung, in that Memories, Dreams, Reflections, said, I broke my foot in 1944 in Switzerland. Then I was in the hospital and I had a heart attack. And then he said he rose above the hospital He saw his disembodied psyche rise above the hospital. Then it rose above planet Earth. He could look down and see the clouds and the sands of Arabia, the reddish sands of Arabia. Then he said he saw a huge boulder hollowed out into a temple, a huge house-sized black boulder hollowed out into a temple like the ones he'd seen in the Gulf of Bengal. And inside he saw a black Hindu in a white robe sitting in the lotus posture. And then behind him was this brilliantly lit room to where he felt that all the people he belonged to in reality existed. All of his previous incarnations or his eternal relations were inside this black hole. It's kind of, it seemed like to me. And that if he could go in there, he would learn about all of his past incarnations. And that as he approached this temple, his entire life was yanked from him painfully and then given back simultaneously. So it's kind of that life review of a near-death experience. And then he saw the primal form of his doctor, who he called Dr. H, rise above the earth up. He said he was about 1,000 miles above the earth, because later he could measure how high he would have had to bend to see what he saw, which is the curvature of the earth. He was above Ceylon overlooking India. Anyway, the form of his doctor said, the earth has need of you, you can't leave, something to that effect. And then he woke up in the hospital.
What was the thing that the doctor said?
Something like the earth needs you still.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The doctor that was rising up.
Right. Dr. H, he called him. And then that doctor later died. The day Jung got out of his sick bed, that doctor took to his own sick bed. And actually, you know what? Today's April 4th. Well, his doctor died April 4th, 1944, and that number 4444 stuck in Jung's mind because it's the number of completion.
Yes, it's 12, yeah. Oh, no, 444 or 4 4s?
4. Well, 4 is the number of completion.
Yes,
So
it is, yeah.
to have 4 4s in
Yes.
Jung's mind, that was symbolically important.
Yes, very good.
That he had kind of had to pay with his life to partake in this situation, which I think is an extremely important thing that happened, because it was that near-death experience where we see this parallel with holographic string theory, which is the culmination of academic physics, because it unites the previously incommensurable languages of general relativity, the theory of the very massive, and quantum physics, the theory of the very small. The holy grail of 20th century physics was to combine those two theories together so that you could have one language of physics that describes everything at every scale, from the smallest to the greatest. And holographic string theory does do that. It's rejected by many because it can't be empirically the strings can't be empirically observed. So people say, oh, this is philosophy, this isn't physics, but mathematically it works. So at any rate, he woke up and then he felt horrible. And he said, it seemed to me as if each of us in the three-dimensional world lives in our own little box of illusion. And he kept talking about the box system. We each live in our own little box, that it's tethered to the horizon of the cosmos by a thread. And then he said that it seemed to him as if the past, the present, and the future were interwoven blissfully out at that horizon of the cosmos, where he went every night for about an hour after midnight for the next 3 weeks when he had these out-of-body mystical experiences. And he experienced these archetypes of the collective unconscious. The one that I always remember is the marriage of Hera and Zeus, that he became one with this archetypal scene. So if you combine the nightly visions he had for 3 weeks after his near-death experience with his vision of each of us being imprisoned in our own little box of illusion, which is tethered to the horizon of the cosmos by a thread, and the past, the present, and the future exist out there, and they project inward on these threads of energy, the illusory three-dimensional world. That's exactly what Leonard Susskind was saying. And Plato mentioned something very similar at the end of the Republic with the near-death experience of a soldier named E.R., who woke up on his own funeral pyre, and then he recalled his near-death experience, where he went out to the horizon of the cosmos, and he saw the 3 singing sister goddesses, the Fates, who represent past, present, and future, weaving the thread of every soul's destiny into this outermost perimeter of the universe. But Carl Jung's was even more explicitly similar to Leonard Suskind's string theory. And so when I saw that, it was the 4th of July, 2010. I knew there was something to be worked out there. And then later I discovered the Psyche equals singularity equation in that Leap Day letter of 1952 to J.R. Smithies, where he concluded by saying psyche equals highest intensity in the smallest space. So that gives us the idea that psyche is singularity. Highest intensity in the smallest space is the gravitational singularity. And he wrote the letter in the context of general relativity, which he learned from Einstein himself. And then we have the collective unconscious mind out at the horizon of the cosmos where the archetypes are. And the archetypes project, says Plato, the material world into existence like a dream or a shadow. And even Brian Greene, the famous physicist who is on TV a lot, he said that Leonard Susskind's theory is a lot like Plato's cave allegory, only it seems to be turned inside out because the more fundamental reality seems to be this two-dimensional holographic film, and that projects the three-dimensional world. Whereas in the cave allegory, the three-dimensional prisoners cast a two-dimensional shadow on the back wall of the cave. So the three-dimensional world is more real than the two-dimensional, but in holographic string theory, it seems as if the two-dimensional realm is more real than the three-dimensional realm. But the way I address that is that from our perspective on Earth, yes, it seems as if the horizon out there is two-dimensional, perfectly flat, spherical interior of a ball. But from disembodied psyches who end up out there, it's infinitely deep because it contains all of space and time, and it contains the archetypes from which all material objects are projected, specifically on these threads of energy. So you have this outermost horizon of the cosmos, which I equate with the collective unconscious aspect of the self archetype. And then the central singularity I equate with the conscious ego aspect of the self archetype. And those two poles of the self archetype can flip into each other because no matter where you are in the universe, you'll see yourself as the central point. So people on a planet out at the horizon of the cosmos, from our perspective, would see themselves as the central point and us out at the horizon of the cosmos. So there's this dynamic complementarity of what is the central point and what is the horizon. A famous saying is that God is the point or the sphere whose center is everywhere and circumference nowhere.
Yeah, and I actually think the first place I could track that back was to Blaise Pascal.
He definitely said it. I don't know if he was the first, but he definitely did say that.
Because I did research and try to find and track it. And Joseph Campbell changed it slightly. He used it, but because Blaise Pascal said nature is a sphere whose circumference is nowhere and the center whose presence is everywhere. But Joseph Campbell changed it to God.
Right. Yeah. Hegel said something similar. Carl Jung lists all the different people who said it. So it's a widely used. Pascal did say it's nature, but I believe he said it's the greatest mark of God's greatness that nature is this. So he does relate God to it.
Yeah, the quote that I found, a couple of them from him didn't have the God words. It just started with nature. But all you're able to find is what other people write about these things.
Right. Well, I believe it's in his book called Pensées, which is French for thoughts. It's written in aphorisms. Another thing he said in that book, in my translation, it's aphorism number 420, is he had a dialogue of one person speaking to another, and the one person was saying, "Oh, you think that it's impossible for something to be omnipresent and indivisible, like God, for example?" Yes, it's impossible. If something's omnipresent, it's spread everywhere, and therefore it can be divided. And then the person responded, "Very well, I'll show you something omnipresent and indivisible, a point traveling everywhere infinitely fast. Because it will be at each point simultaneously, but you can't divide a point because it has no extension in space to be divided. And yet by traveling infinitely fast, it'll be at each point simultaneously."
And do you remember when Feynman and Wheeler actually speculated the fact that there may be only one electron doing all this for the same reason, because it's really the same concept?
Yep, I did read that. Yep, I have mentioned that. And all of these electrons and everything else were contained in the original singularity. They're just manifestations of this original, which I equate with Plato's idea of the good. It's the source of everything, the source of all light, all electromagnetic radiation, and the source of all thought and sentience. But that near-death experience of Carl Jung's at the horizon of the cosmos and his psyche equals singularity equation, you put them together, and then you have this mandala model of the self archetype, which, going back to memories, dreams, reflections, Carl Jung said, that the greatest discovery of his life, which is quite a thing for a guy like Carl Jung to say, was that the psychic image of a mandala emerges from the self archetype in an ego's mind during dreams and fantasies to compensate that conscious ego when it's pulled by opposing demands in life. And that the self archetype is the archetype of wholeness through the union of opposites. And the image that it presents to conflicted egos is the mandala, a circle or a sphere with a central point. So, according to Jung and Pauli, the laws of physics and psychology should mirror each other. So, if the most important law of psychology is that the self archetype produces mandala imagery in the psyche, then my question is, what is the physical correlate of the psychic mandala image? If the laws of physics mirror the laws of psychology, where's the mirror symmetry of the mandala image of the psyche? And I say it's the gravitational effects of black holes. Black holes are geometrically perfect mandalas, a literal mathematical point surrounded by a literal two-dimensional sphere. And they're outside of space and time. Because even the event horizon, that it's just the boundary where space-time is contracting towards the central point at the speed of light. It's not a physical thing. So the black hole itself isn't a physical thing, but the gravitational effects that it produces that are empirically observable are. And I say those gravitational empirically observable effects are the physical correlates of the psychic imagery coming from the self archetype, that the singularity and the self are the same. And in the physical world, it creates the gravitational effects of black holes. And in the psychological realm, it creates mandala imagery during dreams and reveries. So that was another piece of this puzzle.
Have you ever seen the book The Unknown Spirit by Jean Charon?
I don't think so.
I think you're going to find it really interesting. He worked directly with Einstein. He was an atomic physicist, but he came out with his spiritual observations, and he basically, in a nutshell, his theory, and he backs it with his own mathematical equations, is that electrons are conscious, and that electrons have two dimensions, a hyperdimension inside in which time runs in reverse. And as the outer dimension of the electron goes into entropy, the inner dimension goes into negentropy, or into, for the listeners, order. And that every experience that the electron ever has is recorded in the inner dimension of the electron, which is then communicated to the whole of what we would call the universe or source. And he basically says similar things to Steiner. He says that the electron has free will, it has choice, and it has the capacity for thought. And then he ties that through steps into love and life and all the experiences we have. But I just wanted to bring that up in case you haven't read that book, because here's another guy that worked directly with Einstein who had very deep spiritual insights, who could back them with mathematical formula and observations, who's really, if you think of an electron as approaching a point as a metaphor, he's really saying very similar things to you right now.
Yeah, I remember when I first discovered quantum physics, I went to the Rainbow Gathering back in 1992. It was the 20th anniversary in Paonia, Colorado, and this kind of a vagabond who called himself Cactus. Anyway, he gave my friend The Cosmic Code by Heinz R. Pagels. And that was my introduction to quantum physics. And I was reading about these different theories like that Wheeler had about there's just one electron. And I started trying to find out which one of these particles is the equivalent of a soul. I remember. And I was thinking, maybe it's an electron because it's, hardly got any mass. A photon has no mass. And then I was like, what about the neutrino? That's even smaller. And then I eventually ended up with the singularity, which is the smallest of all, has no size, zero volume. But all these other particles emanate from it, so they could represent, like Michio Kaku said, these fundamental particles are like notes on a string. It's kind of a musical frequency of the underlying self. But I definitely think that singularity is the most appropriate concept from physics to equate a soul with, because it contains all of space and time. Now that I said that, sometimes I don't mention it on podcast interviews or conversations, but Immanuel Kant, he responded to David Hume, the Scottish empiricist, writing in the 1700s. Hume says, I'm an empiricist, but I'm a real empiricist. I'm not one of these empiricists who says, oh, we've discovered Newtonian physics and now we know the world's just a big soulless machine. He said, all right, let's define empiricism. If you can perceive it with one of your 5 sense organs, then it's empirically observable. But I can't see, smell, touch, taste, or hear space, empty space, nor can I have any sensory concept of time, or for that matter, the idea of cause and effect. I see this event, and then I see event B happen regularly in that sequence. But I don't see anything called causation. I don't see event A causing B to happen. I just notice that A happens and then B happens regularly after. So he says all you ever actually empirically observe are unconnected, discrete, a rapid flurry of unconnected sense impressions, sights and smells and tastes and touches and sounds. And the ideas of space and time and cause and effect are not empirically observable, yet that's the essence of Newtonian physics. So it's not an empirical theory. It's a theory based on empirically unobservable concepts. Now, granted, it's very useful, but I'm just saying it's not empirically real. And he says space and time and causality are useful fictions that we create. And then Kant came around and said, wow, you woke me from my dogmatic slumber. It's such a simple thought, yet I would have never thought of it. But I disagree that space and time and causality are just fictions that we create through habit. Because where would the habit start? Who would just come up with the idea of, let's just organize these discrete bombardment of sense impressions into a context of space, and hey, let's throw time in. He says, no, rather you're born with those lenses of cognition, which he called the a priori, before experience, lenses of cognition. Space, time, and causality were the ones he focused on the most. They are the lenses of the psyche. Space and time are mental phenomena, the plural. They're not empirically observable. Well, if that's the case, then if you trace space and time back to their source, then you trace it back to the soul. Well, space and time emerged from the singularity of the Big Bang. And I'm saying each of us is a singularity. And when we look out and see the world, I'm looking at a sunset over here, pink clouds, this world of space, the vast horizon, that's a mental projection. But I'm equating the psyche with the singularity and the horizon of the cosmos, according to which space-time is a projection from there, a holographic projection. So it complements what Kant was saying very well. And I think it helps us appreciate, what does it really mean to say we're one with the central singularity and the horizon of the cosmos? It means we are projecting the three-dimensional world into existence from our own inner self. And that each of us is an infinitely powerful point that's eternally outside of space-time, and yet we are the source of space and time, and we project it out of ourselves. And we're all one with the Supreme Self, and I define that as this mandala of the central singularity, which is the conscious ego aspect or pole of the self, and the encompassing horizon of the cosmos.
Now, you've given me a couple of thoughts, well, a shitload of them actually, but I won't kill you with them all. The singularity, as you've described it, the self, as you've described it with the capital SELF, it seems to correlate almost as an equivalent to Whitehead's monad.
Yeah, Whitehead, he had the idea of the actual occasion. Yeah, it definitely, there's a lot of overlaps with what Whitehead was describing and with what Leibniz was describing in his book Monadology, where he talked about the soul a monad has no extension in space. There's a lot of overlap, which is not so surprising because Leibniz co-discovered independently calculus at the same time as Isaac Newton.
Yeah, so they're tapping into the same frequency.
Yeah, well, that's the language of physics. That's the language of gravity. And for Leibniz, with that mathematical knowledge in his head, he came up with monad, the idea of a monad. It's basically the same as a singularity. And Whitehead's actual occasion Did he call it a monad? I haven't read his work since 2010 when I was out in California. I mean, I've read
Uh,
bits and pieces since then, but I studied it there in a seminar.
well, my understanding from studying Whitehead is that the monad is really the equivalent of the soul, and that ultimately God is the monad, and we are all kind of like points bubbling out of a monad, out of
Yeah.
or bubbles coming out of the bubble machine, for lack of a better term. But if you think of the mandala as a monad, if God is the mandala, then we're all mini mandalas or monads within the monad, just like
Oh
we're all
yeah.
inside the universe. So that's how I conceive the conception of a monad. I personally like the monad concept.
Yeah, that would be in the realm of physics. The universe is an inside-out black hole, and it's filled with miniature black holes and supermassive black holes, but the quantum vacuum, which underlies every point of three-dimensional space, is just a plenum of miniature black holes. It's a so they're everywhere. So yeah, it's one big bubble filled with an infinite number of miniature bubbles. So, yeah, God's the bubble machine and we're all the bubbles inside there. The bubble, it's important to keep these ingredients of the central point and the spherical horizon.
Yeah, and that's your symbol of the self, and that's the same symbol for the monad.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm like, my mind is saying, okay, we've got parallel concepts here, which is kind of like you're saying, Newton and Leibniz, same thing, calculus, but then you've got a Whitehead concept, you got a Susskind concept, you got a Jung concept. So it's almost like using different language to describe the same thing. And the words sound different, but really they're pointing to the same thing. Like if you listen to the word love in 5 different languages, the syllables are different, the sounds are different, but it's all pointing to the same thing. In this case, this monad or this self. Enzymes are one of the most important things we can use to supplement our diet. Very few people have normal levels of digestive enzymes. It's extremely common to be digestive enzyme deficient because so many people are eating cooked foods, processed foods, packaged foods, etc. The best digestive enzymes I've ever found are masszymes by Bioptimizers. And one of the things I like about them is not only are they the most advanced technology for how they're produced, the science behind them, but I take them on an empty stomach every morning and every night as proteolytic enzymes to help clean my body. So I've got Wade here, who's the formulator of these enzymes, to tell us how do they work as digestive and proteolytic enzymes, because today I think we really need to be supplementing with high quality enzymes. So Wade, what's unique about masszymes?
Well, one of the interesting things is undigested protein is one of the biggest contaminants that cause problem for people, whether it's in their blood or inflammatory conditions or even impairing recovery. And it's quite common amongst athletes who have high protein diets, interesting enough, who are looking to add recovery, but they're not breaking down their protein effectively. And that was my case way back in the day as a former bodybuilding champion. So we set about cultivating and developing an enzyme formulation that handled all of the amino acids in a pH range from 2 to 12, as well as providing an assortment of assistant enzymes. In other words, it doesn't just break down protein, it handles carbohydrates, it handles fats, it handles fibers, a variety of different things, and they work synergistically together to make sure that you can break down just about any food and digest it properly. Now, when you talk about the difference between enzymes, there's digestive enzymes and systemic enzymes. Systemic enzymes such as like nattokinase or serrapeptase. Well, they don't help break down digestion, but they can break down inflammation or inflammatory conditions, undigested proteins, or scarring tissue inside the body. Well, it turns out when you take masszymes on an empty stomach, it works exactly the same way. It will go into the bloodstream and now works as a systemic enzyme, reducing inflammation, accelerating recovery times. Matt just tore his Achilles tendon and made a full recovery after surgery within a few weeks, which they expected for many months. He was taking as many as 100 a day. Now, I'm not suggesting people do that, but this was an extreme condition. And the bottom line is masszymes is great for recovery, for cleaning up undigested proteins in the system, as well for digesting just about any meal. If this isn't the best digestive enzyme or systemic enzyme that you've ever taken, you get your money back. That's the Bioptimizer guarantee.
You can try Bioptimizer's Math Science at bioptimizers.com/living4D and get 10% off using the code Paul10. That's bioptimizers.com/living, the number 4 and the letter D, and the code is Paul10. Plus, Bioptimizers always have great bonuses and offers when you purchase multiple bottles. So make sure you check them out at bioptimizers.com/living4D and use the promo code Paul10 for your 10% discount.
A quick thought I had too is, can you tell me again, you talked about when Jung was having his near-death experience and there was the black box that you said was like, wasn't that what he said? He was imprisoned in the black box?
Well, he saw a black rock temple out in space, and his encounter with that was that it seemed to him, after he came out of that near-death experience, when he was floating 1,000 miles above the Earth, that each of us here in the three-dimensional world lives in our own little box. He called this a box system, and that each of us is imprisoned in our own little three-dimensional box of illusion, and that each of these little boxes is tethered to the horizon of the cosmos by a thread. And then during his nightly visions he had for 3 weeks, he said it seemed to him as if the past, the present, and future were interwoven into one whole, and that's where the archetypes are. So everything that you can see according to Plato's theory in the empirically observable world is projected from some archetype. So if you see a pine tree or an oak tree or a cherry tree, those are all just imperfect temporary projections from the absolute perfect idea of tree. And Plato specifically describes Socrates saying that these archetypes are out at the spherical horizon of the cosmos, where you can go in between incarnations when your psyche's leaving one body and before it goes into another. Literally out at the horizon of the cosmos, the spherical boundary of space. In the Phaedrus, Socrates is recalling his own process of reincarnation, and he talks about the soul riding a chariot pulled by 2 winged horses. And if you study philosophy and can control these horses, which represent on the one of them is the bodily desires, the sense desires, and the other one is this courageous element that can be used to tame the other horse. If you can pull that off, then you can go all the way out to the horizon of the cosmos, stand on the outer back of the universe, and behold these absolute ideas.
That's tarot number 7, you know.
Oh yeah, what's that? What's that one?
Tarot archetype 7, the chariot. It's the chariot, okay, yeah. And here it is right here. It's the guide. It's my guiding archetype for my Spirit Gem series.
Yeah. Oh, I've seen it plenty of times. Yeah.
So there's your two horses,
right?
And the yin and the yang, the unconscious and the conscious, the implicate and the explicate. And then in Steiner's teachings, the charioteer represents the Christ principle, the ability to stay balanced between these two forces. The material force he calls Ahriman, and then the force of illusion he calls Lucifer, and he says the Christ principle is the charioteer who has to balance these two or he'll wipe his chariot out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the metaphor. But the point is that the archetypes, which project the material world, are out at the horizon of the cosmos, and which means that the past, the present, and the future are out at the horizon of the cosmos, because the archetypes are eternal and they contain all of the temporal manifestations that come from them. So all the trees that have ever grown on the earth throughout all time are all projected from one absolute idea of tree, according to Plato.
Plato, yeah. There's your conservation of information, by the way.
Yeah, right. And they're specifically located at the horizon of the cosmos, where the great atheist Leonard Susskind says that each point of this encompassing sphere contains the past, the present, and the future of the entire interior volume of the universe. That these archetypes are superimposed upon each other, that they are different, and yet they're superimposed on each other. So anywhere you go on that horizon, it contains all of the archetypes. It contains the idea of the good, which contains all of the archetypes, but they manifest in a variegated way temporally in the interior volume of the universe.
There's two things that come to mind. One, the reason I was asking you about the box, because Jung said we're imprisoned in a box. In alchemy, the symbol for the earth element is the cube.
For Plato, too, in the Timaeus.
And then you have in alchemy the prima materia, the prima matria, the first substance, which without matter, the soul would have no way to experience itself. Plotinus says the soul is invisible, and its greatest addiction is to matter because it doesn't recognize itself until it has something to play with. The problem is it falls into it, which is really the alchemist's conception of the dragon, which is God's spirit trapped in matter. And the whole spiritual process of alchemy is to extract the spirit from matter, but be conscious so that you actually know who you are without a body.
Right, yeah.
And then you can take the journey to the periphery and say, oh, here's how we've been doing this all the time. Finally, I can be conscious of the truth. The other thing that I wanted to share with you is just my own spiritual conception about atheism. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on it. I feel, especially people like Susskind. Now, there's the Richard Dawkins types, which
Right.
personally,
he's not, I don't think he's a very sincere intellectual. He always picks on people who can't defend themselves. I never see him picking on anybody who could stand a chance
yeah,
in an intellectual battle.
to me, Richard Dawkins he's become exactly what he hates about Christians, except he's just on the opposite polarity.
Yeah, I don't have a great reverence for his, he's a smart guy. He's a good writer.
Yeah, The Selfish Gene was a good book, but the point I'm making though is I'm excluding Dawkins from this, what I'm about to say, because I think I did research into atheism and I found that some psychologists who have looked into this deeply have found a correlation, and that there's a high incidence of trauma with fathers in atheism. And because the Abrahamic religions all have a father God in the sky, that they're projecting their father pain onto the religious God. And therefore they're rejecting the Abrahamic concept of God because it has an association. They got a complex. They're projecting a complex. And to me, that made sense. But now if we take it a step further to a more honest atheist, I'll call Susskind an honest atheist for whatever his reasons. But this is what I'm interested in your thoughts on. Here's what I feel in my heart. I feel that a man like that, whether he knows it or not, is trying to defend God from being encapsulated as something that can be weighed or measured and therefore idolized. Because then God becomes an idol. And as soon as you have an idol, you have a sign, you don't have a symbol. You lose the transcendent function. Nobody goes into a state of numinous experience at a stop sign because everybody knows what it means. But a symbol, by definition, takes you beyond it. If a stop sign was a symbol, everybody would be sitting there meditating and having mystical experiences when you have traffic jams all over the world.
Right.
So do you see what I'm saying? I really feel at the unconscious level, somebody like Susskind may not realize he's trying to protect the idea of God from the impurity of being idolized.
Yeah, I've thought about that, about different atheists I've known. Sometimes I think it's a higher form of piety that informs their atheism. One of the thoughts I had was the branch of theology called theodicy.
Mm-hmm.
How can an all-powerful, all-good God allow evil in the world?
Well, I can answer that easily, but yes.
Right. There's a lot of answers, but I think some atheists just say there's no God because if there were, then we would have to say God allows evil, and that they're kind of trying to protect the idea of God. And then what you were saying, let's not make an idol out of God. Suskind's a Jew. He's an atheist, but he's a Jew. So that don't make God into an idol sentiment,
yeah, there it is.
Is strong in Judaism.
Exactly. And they won't even write the word God.
Right. And another thing is, I've seen YouTube videos with him where he lightens up on the atheism a lot. And he says, oh, I'm not an atheist, I'm an agnostic. And even in his books, he mentions he has this one situation where he's using an analogy of fish in a shallow ocean of water. And how would they be able to describe their world? And he talks, there's a fight between the fishicists and the cosmologists and how they perceive it. And then, but the reason I remembered is because in some part of this conversation, they're like, one of them mentions how this is mystical, and then the other one says, "Yeah, but let's not mention that, or we'll lose our funding."
That's too true.
Yeah. So Susskind, he presents himself as an atheist in those books, but he leaves little clues and hints, and then outside of the book, he openly says he's an agnostic.
And that's a healthy position. I mean, ultimately,
Yeah,
doesn't my translation of that is I don't know, so I'm not going to make a value decision because I don't have enough information.
he more or less takes that position outside of his books, but I think he wanted to protect his pet theory from any reproach, as if pointing to it as evidence for God's a reproach, but in academic circles it is. So he takes this. I mean, the subtitle of his book, The Cosmic Landscape, is String Theory and the Illusion of Intelligent Design. He says there is the illusion that this universe is intelligently designed, because if any of these extremely fine-tuned parameters, such as the expansion rate of space-time, the cosmological constant, which is he called the mother of all physics problems, it's a decimal point with like 116 zeros and a 1, and if it was even slightly different, no life. And the same for the speed of light and all these other fine structure constant, all these constants of nature have to be precisely what they are and balanced with all the others in order for biological life to exist. And he says it obviously seems fine-tuned. It seems like this is way too improbable to happen
By accident.
accidentally.
Yeah.
And the way he gets around it is he says, yes, but string theory implies there's a megaverse of universes. He uses the word megaverse instead of multiverse. And even if there's not an infinite number of universes, because they throw renormalization at that to get rid of the infinity, there's still 1 to the 500 types, 10 times to the 500 types of universes, and then each of those. So there's a almost infinite number of universes.
Yeah, that's the many worlds theory says there's 10 to the 500 either universes
It's
or
types of universes, and
types
then
of
there's many
universes.
more of each type.
Yeah, and they
And
keep bifurcating.
yeah, so he says if that's the case, and the math indicates it is, then, although extremely unlikely, it becomes almost inevitable that some of those universes are going to be just perfectly balanced for life to evolve. I do believe in a multiverse, but I think they're all intelligent beings in their own right, because they're all centered on a singularity, which is the God archetype.
Yeah, personally, I'll share something with you that I don't share often in podcasts just because it just hasn't been the right opportunity. But I think one of the problems we have is that most human beings don't have nearly enough imagination to really conceive of what the word God really means. And this is how I bring this up with my advanced students. I say, I have a question for you. If you had infinite energy, infinite information, infinite intelligence, infinite processing power, and infinite processing speed, what could you create? And within 60 seconds, they all look at me and go, anything. Okay, remember, now you're talking about God. So if you think something that's that powerful is just going to create one universe that's 13.9 billion years old, well, that means God was sitting around with all that power doing nothing and all that creativity doing nothing. And it took an infinite amount of time for God to create one universe. It doesn't make any sense at all. So, having really committed myself to deeply investigating these things and asking deep questions, and whether they take me years to get the answer to, some of them have, I've come to the conclusion that rule one, if you can imagine it, it's possible. Because you are God embodied. The basis of your consciousness is God consciousness. And the only way God can know itself is to try all of its probabilities and experience them. And that's what we are. I say human beings are Ram Dass, God workers. We are all God experiencing one possibility. And God never does anything twice. There's no two snowflakes alike. There's no two rocks, no two pebbles, no sand, no human fingerprints. Identical twins are not identical. There's nothing in the created universe that's identical. So, my conclusion is God is doing everything. And this goes back to an old statement that I don't know where it came from, but I'm sure you know it. Why did God create time? So that everything doesn't happen all at once.
Right.
Otherwise, God could not make meaning out of it. So ultimately, I believe God is doing everything you can conceive. And like, I don't know, was it Shakespeare that said there's more to the universe than you can conceive, or Horatio or something like that?
Yeah, there's more to heaven and earth than your philosophy can reveal,
Can
something
contain
like
or
that.
something like that. Yeah, and I
Something
think
like that.
that's too damn true. I think one of the problems with education is it blinds people into a belief. Are you familiar with professor of religion and theology? He's passed away now, but his name was James Carse. He wrote a phenomenal book called The Finite and Infinite Games.
No.
That would blow your mind. James Carse was amazing. I've got a phenomenal interview with him. Sadly, I had my second interview with him. I think he was right close to 90 when I did the interview with him. He's sharp as James Carse. I think it's episode 62. Unbelievable guy. I forgot why, but anyhow, he wrote a book called The Religious Case Against Belief, which I studied thoroughly. And he makes a very important point. He said the experience of religion is meant to be a mystical experience. It's not meant to be something that you wrap up in a dogma and concretize. And he said that the problem with belief is as soon as you start believing, that you stop being open to the mystery. And therefore, the religious experience dies with the belief. In other words, as soon as you canonize something and you say, God wants this and God wants that, and if you don't do this, you're going to burn in hell, you've just taken the God right out of God. And so what you have is exactly why Nietzsche said God is dead, because you've turned the symbol and the transcendent function into a sign. And I think personally, that's the problem with religion. It's killed God. And the conversation we're having right now is really an honest conversation about God. And it goes right back to Richard Feynman and quantum physicists. You know, these infinities pop up for a reason.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Sure they do. Yeah.
And I read Cantor's mathematics. I read 3 books on infinity mathematics. I've got these 3 books, and they give such a solid justification for the reality of infinity behind everything. I just think one of the most sad things is we've got so many people with such hard opinions that have done very little study and even less inner exploration.
Right.
And that's a problem. You know, Steiner talked about the development of the awareness soul. So Steiner says anything with an inside and an outside has a soul. First, you have a mineral soul, then a biological soul, then that emerges into the intellectual soul. He says the next stage of development is the awareness soul. And he says the birth of the awareness soul begins when you really honestly begin to ask yourself, is it really true about anything? Is it really true that God will burn you in hell? Is it really true that the universe is this old? Is it really true? ... And look, Todd, you and I both are old enough and wise enough to know if you research anything, is cold water dips good for you? You'll find highly qualified people saying don't do it, it's bad for you, and highly qualified people saying it's great for you.
Right.
Sex, money, drugs, food, it's the same thing. You search the internet. My students come to me all the time confused. I got a handful of papers on one side that says don't do it, and the other side they got a handful. I say, good. Welcome to the day your awareness soul is born. Stop searching the fucking internet. Go get in the cold water and see what happens.
Right.
Pay attention.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think education's a double-edged sword. It's crippled us, but it's also taken away our because you have to you got to go on Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. You got to be willing to die for telling the truth. We talked about Hafiz in the beginning. Look at Shirawardi. Look at, the Christian, he's in my book. The Catholic Church tortured him for 7 years for teaching that the earth was not the center of the universe.
Oh, Galileo?
No, I'm brain farting. I get up at 3:30 in the morning, so right now it's late.
They burned him at the stake?
They tortured him. Yeah, and he said that there was infinite suns and that God was infinite. You know who I'm talking about. Of course, when we're done and you say goodbye, I'll remember. But anyhow,
it's a famous story.
Yes, and it's a true story. But anyhow, the point I'm making is we have a culture that is set up so that if you go on the hero's journey and you really do honestly explore these things, you're going to find out things that go against canon, against dogma, and against organizational beliefs. And, remember, the people that killed Jesus were the ones he came to save. The problem is that we've set up an education system where it's almost illegal and it's highly dangerous to actually do what you're supposed to do to educate yourself. You're not supposed to just photocopy other people's shit and believe it. You're supposed to go test it. And that's what I love about Steiner. Steiner says, don't believe anything. Follow the methods I'm teaching you and go test it for yourself. And that's what I've spent my life doing. And quite frankly, I don't give a shit if they burn me at the stake or kill me. I think it'll be funny because I know what's next. I'll come in their nightmares to say, listen, Peckerwood, here I am. What are you going to do now?
When you were talking about that, it reminds me of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna is talking to Arjuna on the battlefield on the chariot between the two armies. I know you're aware of this because I was watching your video with J.P. Stearns, the
J.P.
famous
Sears, maybe?
Sears, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
comedian. Yeah, he's one of my students.
Yeah, it was interesting to learn that. But anyway, you mentioned the Bhagavad Gita, and in that classic text, Krishna, he says, "I am God, I am Vishnu," but he also says, "Abandon all religion and just surrender unto me."
Mm-hmm.
To Arjuna, he's like, "Yeah, well, the Vedas say this and this and that, but give all that up and just here we are together on this chariot right here on the battlefield, and just do what I'm telling you." Now, in one respect, that's kind of like saying, shut up and do what I say. But on another respect, it was like to give up all your dogmatic formulas and surrender yourself to the universal soul
Yeah,
and let the soul within tell you what to do.
that's exactly how I do it. Are you familiar with Shankara?
Oh, yeah. I talk about him a lot. He was the atheistic interpreter of the Vedanta philosophy. And then the Vaishnava, Vishnu worshipping reformers came after him, but he reintroduced Vedanta philosophy into the Buddhistic, more straightforwardly atheistic intellectual class of India at the time. And then he said, yeah, you're right. It's atheistic and impersonal. Everything is this impersonal Brahman, but let's study it through this lens of the Vedanta philosophy, which opens the door for a personalistic, theistic interpretation, which is what happened after him. Ramanuja, Madhava, and then Chaitanya after Shankara. But yeah, I am familiar with Shankara.
I read his book, Crest Jewel of Discrimination, and I've, of course, read many references to him. But Shankara says something that's so damn appropriate. He says, nobody can understand scripture until they're enlightened. And when they're enlightened, they do not need scripture.
Yeah, right.
And that just wraps it all up right there. Like, how many people walking around telling us what to do and how you should live are quoting scripture, but they're a long way from enlightenment. And Joseph Campbell, among many others, warned a literal interpretation of scripture will get you in trouble.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Religion can be used for the exact opposite, and often is the exact opposite purpose of what it's designed to be.
Yeah. I've had a great dialogue with you, Todd, and I'm really grateful for your book. You sparked a lot of vision in me and a lot of creativity. And there's still many sections in your book. You can see here, I've got lots of tags that my soul has said, read this, read this, read this.
Look, great minds think alike.
Yeah,
I got
exactly.
a lot of tags in the same book.
Yeah. That's pretty good because you wrote it. So if you're still studying it,
Yeah,
don't you find sometimes that spirit moves stuff through you, but then you have to go read what you wrote to really digest it?
Yeah, sometimes I'm reading and I'm like, wow, this guy is smart. Wait a minute, I
Where'd
wrote that?
I know. I love that. I was like, that's my proof that soul is real, right?
Right.
Because oftentimes when we're doing this, we're channeling our highest self. And it has to come down into the persona, into the mask, right, where we're engaging in this 3-dimensional world with time and playing out the drama. But
Right. Yeah. I mean, I know I try to surrender myself to God, and I say, just please use me as an instrument, because it's so fun to
Yeah.
have the infinite intelligent being use you.
Yeah.
And then it's as, because I know I'm a very finite, I believe I'm an eternal soul. I believe I'm a singularity, but my intelligence is very limited. But I pray for God to work through me.
If it was any other way, though, I wouldn't be able to have this meeting with you. I mean, if a snowflake didn't have edges, there would be no snow.
Yeah.
So you see what I'm saying when I said to my soul, if God's unconditional love, why is all this here? God creates condition to love itself unconditionally, and here we all are, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately that is religion. If you really want to understand religion, then just love fully and quit blasting the shit out of people and labeling them as racists and all this other crazy stuff that goes on. It's sometimes I just feel so sad in my heart that human beings are so terribly lost. It's just like if you would just hold still and stop watching television and sit by a river, or if you need help, get someone skilled at using mushrooms or some psychedelics to shut your ego off for a while so you can actually see what's right in front of you all the time, and you probably find out what religion really is.
Before we part, we're talking about love and religion. One thing that I like about this idea of the psyche equals singularity equation is that it means we're all one, literally compacted into a point with no separation. We're all inconceivably simultaneously unique perspectives of our own subjective points of will, but we're also all one. And even if you think of nothing else, if you believe that, then the instinct of self-love, which we all have, or we wouldn't eat, we wouldn't bathe, will automatically start to embrace everybody else
Mm-hmm.
because you're going to see them as yourself. Love your
Yes.
neighbor. So Jesus said, first, love God with all your heart, soul, and strength. And then the second commandment is like the first, love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
And
He even said, love thy enemy as thyself.
we'll love everybody as yourself. And the reason that's the second commandment is because the first one says love God. And I define God as that singularity who sees through every other singularity simultaneously. And if we're all part of this omnipresent God, then we are one with our neighbor, even if our neighbor is our enemy. And it's just the instinct of self-love will automatically start to embrace other people, at least theoretically. I mean, I don't know if I'm a great biographical case study, but I try to love people. I know I should, and I believe
I
that's the
try to
reason.
too. I mean, yes, I think, somebody wise once said, it is important to love everybody, but you do not have to like them. And I think there's a lot of wisdom there. My definition of God, Todd, is that for which there is no other.
That's a good one.
I think that sums it up. I mean, if there's a Christian God and a Muslim God, you've got others. So that's the highest power of a belief system. But for me, God is that for which no other. It's the ultimate impasse. You cannot get past it. You run into no thing and everything at the same time, which is not in, you can't comprehend it. Even Lao Tzu says, all things have their back to the mother. Meaning if it's all God, there's nothing behind God to look at. So we're all looking in from the event horizon. We're looking
Yeah,
in.
I was going to say the mother, because Plato
Yeah.
calls the horizon of the cosmos literally this outer sphere, the mother substance in the Timaeus.
I've often pondered, why is it that every creature in nature has eyes in the front looking forward, but no eyes behind it, even though many things will kill you from behind? Because we are made in God's image. God has nowhere to look but into itself. And I think that we're all looking in. I think we're actually built to look in, just like God is. I mean, personally, I find God the most fascinating thing. It's the one thing since I was a child that has interested me enough to keep me studying books and meditating and doing deep plant medicine ceremonies to ask questions and questions and questions. And I just personally, I've never found anything more interesting to me. And my study of life and of health has ultimately been what I feel to be my responsibility to my understanding of God. Because I feel anyone that really does understand what God is and what God means is interested in the well-being of nature and of human beings. And to the degree that you say you're religious, but you're willing to shoot the shit out of people with different viewpoints, you still haven't got a clue what the word God means, and you've been reading too many books.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I agree. There's no reason to kill people over differences of belief.
Yeah, but we know how often it goes on. I've had such a great time with you, and anytime if you have something else you want to share, come have a rap session with me, and if it's a book or whatever you want to promote, I'll support you for sure. You want to guide people to your website, online courses, anything else, YouTube, whatever you want to share?
Yeah, the website is psycheandsingularity.com.
Easy.
Yeah, my YouTube channel is Tod Desmond, Tod, and then Desmond, Desmond. If you put Psyche and Singularity into a Google search, it's going to bring you to like my YouTube videos about the book. We just put out the class, Immortality and the Unreality of Death, A Hero's Journey Through Philosophy, Psychology, and Physics, on that YouTube channel. And it's about a 16-hour course. And then there's the multiple choice test that you can purchase on that website, Psyche and Singularity, and an option to fill in essay questions that relate the information from that class, which is based on the book, Psyche and Singularity, to your own hero's journey. And then I'll respond and try to maybe link some ideas with whatever ideas a person might come up with. So, yeah, that's it. That class in the book.
And are you teaching at the Integral Institute of Psychology, or I forgot what you're doing now?
No, I teach at the College of Southern Maryland, community college in the southern counties of Maryland.
Man, what a great time. Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah. Thank you for your book. You gifted me because you brought me into a meditation that tied the Bindu point and the string theory, which is something I've been trying to figure out. How do these two relate to each other? And my soul said, here's the answer. But if it wasn't for your book, I wouldn't have had the reason to look for the connecting link. So now I've got a reason to get more clarity. And I felt maybe it might be worth sharing that with you, because it might take you into meditation as well. But it could be a helpful bridging point.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I was seeing in my mind what you were describing. So
I'll send you some pictures I had my artist do of the Bindu point. I think you'll find them very interesting.
All right, great.
I've got a very good artist.
Oh, good. Yeah.
All right. Well, lots of love. And to all of you listening, thank you. I hope you enjoyed this amazingly awesome dialogue with me and Tod, and hope you appreciate Tod as much as I do. And his book is badass. So if you want to really take a deep dive and really get a good sense of who Carl Jung was and understand a lot more about cosmology and black holes and all the things we've been talking about. I mean, we touched the surface of the book. He gave us the essence, but there's a lot more in there, trust me. And check out his websites, and he's got these courses for you. I've seen one of them. It's really well done. I hope our conversation stimulated you to ask yourself some deep questions about beliefs and inspired you to go on the hero's journey and develop your own deep, intimate relationship with God, that for which there is no other, not the chief architect of a belief system. And I hope that our conversation has inspired you to find ways to love everybody and everything, and know that it is an absolute mystery, and it is the ultimate form of magic that we are all part of. And thanks to my sponsors for your awesome products and for giving so much love and care back to the farmers that provide the source materials for your great products. And I love each and every one of you. And I will be back a week from today with something magical, mysterious, and awesome. I don't know if I can top Tod, but I will try to see what I can do. So, Tod, thanks once again, and thanks to everybody.
Thank you for listening to Living 4D with Paul Chek and today's guest, Tod Desmond. Tod has a free online class called Immortality and the Unreality of Death, a hero's journey through philosophy, psychology, and physics. You can access it from his website, psycheandsingularity.com, or on his YouTube channel, youtube.com/@Tod Desmond 6820. Connect with Tod on Facebook at Tod.Desmond and purchase his book Psyche and Singularity, Jungian Psychology and Holographic String Theory on Amazon.com. Catch up with Paul on Instagram, TikTok and Threads at paul.chek, on X at paulchek, or on his YouTube podcast channel, youtube.com/living4D with Paul Chek. You can watch more on Paul's blog at paulcheksblog.com or visit the Chek Institute site at chekinstitute.com to find Paul's e-learning courses, advanced training programs, and to learn more about the Chek Academy. You can read the show notes and find links to all the resources mentioned in this episode at chekinstitute.com/podcast. Again, a big thank you to our premier sponsors, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley, and Organifi. We could not produce this podcast without their support. As you heard in this episode, all our sponsors offer special discounts for our listeners, so please visit the show notes page at chekinstitute.com/podcast for links and details. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and a warm review on the podcast platform of your choice. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and YouTube.